There we go. Good evening. My name is Jessica Similchek-Smith, and I am the city clerk for the city of Shoreline. I will now call to order the Shoreline City Council regular meeting for January 3rd, 2022. Good evening. My name is Jessica Similchek-Smith. Okay, a little technical glitch there, but we can keep going. So tonight, the city has 4 newly elected council members beginning their term. And last month, on December 22nd, to be precise, King County District Court Judge Marcine Anderson performed the oath of office for John Ramsdale, Laura Mork, Eben Pobey, and Chris Roberts. We recorded this ceremony, and I would like to share with you the video of the council members being sworn in.
Good evening. My name is Marcine Anderson. I'm one of the King County District Court judges here in Shoreline. It is my absolute pleasure to be here today to swear in 4 Shoreline City Council members, 3 of them brand new ones. So the first person I'm going to introduce and to swear in will be Mr. John Ramsdale. The second will be Ms. Laura Monk. The third will be Mr. Eben Pobey. And the fourth is Mr. Chris Roberts, who has been here several terms, I think. So welcome to everybody for being here today. And this is just a wonderful occasion. I'm so happy to be invited to be here with you today. And so what I'm going to do is have you raise your right hand, please, and repeat after me. I, John Ramsdale.
I, John Ramsdale.
Having been duly elected.
Having been duly elected.
To the office of the City of Shoreline.
To the office of the City of Shoreline.
Council position number 1.
Council position number 1.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully.
That I will faithfully.
And impartially.
And impartially.
Discharge and perform.
Discharge and perform.
The duties of this office.
The duties of this office.
As prescribed by law.
As prescribed by law.
And to the best of my ability.
And to the best of my ability.
And that I will support and maintain.
And that I will support and maintain.
The Constitution of the State of Washington.
The Constitution of the State of Washington.
And of the United States of America.
And of the United States of America.
And the ordinances of the City of Shoreline.
And the ordinances of the City of Shoreline.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Good afternoon or good evening. And I'll start with swearing you in now. I, raise your right hand, please. I, Laura Mork.
I, Laura Mork,
Having been duly elected.
having been duly elected
To the office of the City of Shoreline.
to the office of the City of Shoreline,
Council position number 3.
Council position number 3,
Do solemnly swear.
do solemnly swear
That I will faithfully.
that I will faithfully
And impartially.
and impartially
Discharge and perform.
discharge and perform
The duties of this office.
the duties of this office
As prescribed by law.
as prescribed by law
And to the best of my ability.
and to the best of my ability,
And that I will support and maintain.
and that I will support and maintain
The Constitution of the State of Washington.
the Constitution of the State of Washington
And of the United States of America.
and of the United States of America
And the ordinances of the City of Shoreline.
and the ordinances of the City of Shoreline.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good evening. Raise your right hand, please. Repeat after me. I, Eben Pobey,
I, Eben Pobey,
having been duly elected
having been duly elected
to the office of the City of Shoreline,
to the office of the City of Shoreline,
Council position number 5,
Council position number 5,
do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will faithfully and impartially
that I will faithfully and impartially
discharge and perform
discharge and perform
the duties of this office
the duties of this office
as prescribed by law
as prescribed by law
and to the best of my ability.
and to the best of my ability.
And that I will support and maintain
And then I will support and maintain
the Constitution of the State of Washington
Constitution of the State of Washington,
and of the United States of America,
and of the United States of America,
and the ordinances of the City of Shoreline.
and ordinances of the City of Shoreline.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Raise your right hand, please. And repeat after me. I, Chris Roberts,
I, Chris Roberts,
having been duly elected
having been duly elected
to the office of the City of
to
Shoreline,
the office of the City of Shoreline,
Council Position Number 7,
Council Position Number 7,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully and impartially
that I will faithfully and impartially
discharge and perform
discharge and perform
the duties of this
the
office
duties of this office
as prescribed by law,
as prescribed by law,
and to the best of my ability,
and to the best of my ability,
and that I will support and maintain
and that I will support and maintain
the Constitution of the State of
the
Washington
Constitution of the State of Washington
and of the United States of America,
and of the United States of America,
and the ordinances of the City of Shoreline.
and of the ordinances of the City of Shoreline.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, congratulations to all our newly and re-elected council members. I will now call the roll. Councilmember Ramsdale.
Here.
Councilmember Scully,
Present.
Councilmember Mork,
Present.
thank you. Councilmember McConnell,
Here.
Councilmember Povey,
Here.
Councilmember Robertson. Here. And Councilmember Roberts.
Here.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is election of mayor and deputy mayor. So the process for electing mayor and deputy mayor was found in your agenda packet. And I will briefly summarize for you the rules of the process. So you may nominate only one person until everyone wishing to nominate a candidate has had the opportunity to do so. Once I open the floor for nominations, I will accept them on a first come basis. So over Zoom, that means whoever raises their hand first. Voting will take place in the order that nominations were made, and I will ask that you vote by raising your virtual Zoom hand. I will only be asking for affirmative votes. So as soon as a nominee receives a majority vote, which is 4 votes, I will declare them elected and no further votes will be taken on any of the remaining nominees. And so if no one receives a majority vote, I will call for nominations again and repeat this process. So after mayor is elected, they will conduct elections for deputy mayor. So at this time, I would like to open up the floor for nominations for mayor. Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you, Ms. Simmelchuk-Smith. I'd like to nominate Councilmember Keith Scully.
Thank you. Councilmember Scully has been nominated for mayor. Are there any additional nominations? Okay, seeing none, I will declare the nominations closed. All in favor of electing Councilmember Scully as mayor, please vote by raising your Zoom hand. Okay, I see 7 hands. So Councilmember Scully, you are elected mayor of the City of Shoreline. And I will turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Simmelchuk-Smith, and thank you to the rest of the council. I'm really honored and I look forward to working with you over the next year. The first task, of course, is the election of deputy mayor, and the same rules that Ms. Simmelchuk-Smith described for mayor apply here. So I'll recognize the first person to raise their hand with a nomination, which is Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you. I nominate Councilmember Robertson for deputy mayor.
Councilmember Robertson has been nominated. Are there any other nominations for the position of deputy mayor? Any other nominations? Seeing none, Councilmember Robertson has been nominated for deputy mayor, and all wishing to vote in favor, can you please raise your Zoom hand? And Ms. Similchek-Smith, I see 7 hands raised, so I believe Councilmember Robertson has been unanimously elected as deputy mayor. All right, thank you all. And again, I'm looking forward to working with all of you over the next 2 years. Next item is the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or requests to change the agenda? Seeing none, the next item is report of the city manager. Ms. Terry, is there a city manager's report?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just give it a moment for the city clerk to load it. And again, congratulations to all of our new and newly elected council members. So good evening, Council. The extremely transmissible Omicron variant has pushed King County's rate of COVID-19 cases significantly higher than at any other point in the pandemic. At our last meeting on December 13th, the reported average of cases was 325 cases per day. In the 3 weeks since then, the county is now seeing over 2,100 new cases a day. The county's rates of hospitalizations are increasing and are nearing September's peak. Thankfully, deaths remain low at this time. Shoreline's case rate has also increased. In mid-December, we were averaging 6 new cases per day, and we are now averaging 47 new cases per day. Our hospitalization and death rate continues to be very low. And as you can see by this graph, we are at a peak not seen in the pandemic before. As we have been urging week after week for a long time now, we continue to ask that the community take precautions regarding COVID-19. Masks are required by the state of Washington in both indoor public settings and outdoor events with over 500 people, even if you are fully vaccinated. Public health is recommending that people wear high quality, close fitting masks, such as N95, KN95, or KF94. Disposable surgical masks are the next highest recommended alternative and are preferable to cloth masks. If you do not have access to disposable masks, make sure your cloth mask has at least 2 layers. Proof of vaccination or a negative COVID-19 test taken within the last 72 hours is required for entry into many indoor settings in King County, including restaurants, theaters, and gyms. We would advise people to please avoid crowded indoor settings. And if you have symptoms, please get tested and then stay home and away from others. And I will say, in order to get tested, there are very long waits currently. If you have not yet been vaccinated, we urge you to do so, and as that is probably the most important thing that you could do at this time. And if you are eligible to receive a booster, we encourage you to get one. To schedule a vaccine appointment, contact your health provider or visit covidvaccinewa.org for other available locations. Just a little recap of our snow event. As you all know, it started snowing on Christmas late in the evening and fell through the following day and then off and on for the last week. As the snow and ice quickly compacted on roads and the temperature stayed below freezing, it was very difficult to get the ice off of the roads. In fact, our plows cannot get that type of ice off of the road in those temperatures. As the temperatures started to rise, our crews have been working to clear the compact snow and ice from the roads. If you were on residential streets today, you noticed it was kind of a slushy mess. But hopefully the snow is continuing to melt and that we'll get back to just our normal wet roads within the next day or so. So a big thank you to our community who has been patient through this event, and a big thank you to our staff members who have been working very hard to make the roads safe throughout the last holiday week. And because of some of the challenges in accessing many areas, The Recology has been unable to provide collection service since the beginning of our storm event on December 26th. And everyone impacted by this service interruption may put out double their normal load on their next pickup day. I know today they canceled service, so hopefully tomorrow they will be able to do their regular service. Bi-weekly recycling service will follow the normal schedule. Recology is also providing free drop-off collection of garbage and recycling at Hamlin Park starting Tuesday, January 4th through Thursday, January 6th, between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. The dumpsters are located in the first parking lot to the left as you enter the park off of 15th and 160th. And council has voted to place a bond measure on the February 8th, 2022 special election ballot for park improvements and park land acquisition. We are holding a series of factual informational presentations on this, and you can join us for an online community information session on Tuesday, January 11th at 7 p.m. or Thursday, January 13th at 12 p.m. and 7 p.m. Find more information about Proposition 1 on the city's website at shorelinewa.gov/prop1. And last but not least, there was an appeal hearing before the hearing examiner that was scheduled for tomorrow, January 4th. It has been postponed and a new date for this hearing has yet to be determined. The Planning Commission will hold their virtual meeting this Thursday, January 6th at 7 p.m. And on the agenda is the 2021 Development Code Amendments continued discussion. And you can find more information on shorelinewa.gov/calendar for other events. And that is the end of my report, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. Next up are council reports. Are there any council members with reports? Mayor Hall, former Mayor Hall, and I met with the state auditor's office over the break. It's a mandatory annual review that the state conducts and sort of go through our finances with a fine-tooth comb. And I am delighted to report that they found nothing out of the ordinary, no exceptional findings and no corrections to it. So I want to thank Ms. Terry and Ms. Lane in our finance office, along with all their great staff for getting us through yet another audit. Next up is public comments. And Ms. Similchik-Smith, I understand there are 5 people signed up.
That is correct.
All right, so next up is our public comment period, where we invite comments from the audience on any item on our agenda or any item of concern to the city. We ask that you introduce yourself with your name and city of residence, and we limit public comment to 3 minutes. Would you please introduce the first person?
Yes, Mayor. Our first speaker is Tilo Stitz. However, I do not see their name in the list of attendees. Tilo, if you are on the call, could you please raise your hand? Okay, so moving along, our next speaker is Nathan Hawkins. And Nathan, go ahead.
Mr. Hawkins, can you go ahead and try speaking? It looks like he's muted. Ms. Similchik-Smith, is there a way for you to remove that?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we've got you now. I apologize for that. Please go ahead.
Thank you all. Good evening. Yeah, so to be sensitive to time, I appreciate all you serve in our city. I'm here this evening to speak to the issue of transportation. As I understand, that's on the agenda. I live in the Westminster Triangle, specifically on Evanston Avenue North, immediately south of all the development that's transpired near Central Market. And for some time prior to that, we have had issues with people cutting through the triangle on Evanston Avenue in order to avoid the stoplights on Westminster, as well as 145th and Greenwood. And we have sought mitigation of this issue for several years now. I recall meeting Council Member Roberts when he visited our block party several years ago. We've done the traffic survey. We've submitted requests via the appropriate systems. We've had the analyses come out, and never has anything been done. We're asking for some mitigation because the traffic continues to increase. Moreover, because of the distance between the property lines, people travel at a high rate of speed. We have no curbs, let alone sidewalks. And so between the chicanes and the pass off, people tear through. So yeah, we would really appreciate the attention of the city. Just for context sake, on the corner of 148th and Fremont, over 30 children catch the bus to Parkwood Elementary School every morning. They walk to the bus stop with their family and younger siblings, many of them down Evanston, and families drive to the bus stop because it's unsafe to walk on Evanston Avenue. We regularly have people speeding by and shouting at us because we have children who play outside and there's no place safe for them to play. If there were even a defined pathway that cars would travel in and we could stay off, that would be desirable. So I hope that makes sense, and appreciate the attention to this matter on behalf of the council.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Anne Michelle. Anne, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you to the Shoreline City Council members. Thank you very much for giving me the time to speak with you. I want to follow up on the letter that I sent to council last week about the property next to Echo Lake Park and the interurban trail. I sent another overhead of the area today to try and make it a little clearer. If you can see that, you see our home on the left and the lot that used to be part of our yard in the middle, and then the path, the bike path and the trail and park on the right next door to that. Seattle City Light intends to remove the longstanding security fence that's along the trail, and that's going to expose the public to increased crime. The property that would be opened up has a large flat open area, a couple of those, and secluded areas as well. So it's really not hard for me to imagine that that could become another camp like Bitter Lake. My husband and I moved to Shoreline over 4 years ago. Our home is on Echo Lake, and most of what we thought was our property has been protected by a security fence that runs for over 200 feet along the trail and park. It separated our property from the trail and park, and it has been there since at least 1964. Over 3 years ago, we were surprised to learn that Seattle City Light claimed most of our yard. They tore down most of the fence, leaving us exposed to everything that goes on along the trail. Without the fence, our yard appeared to be part of the park and trail, and people began using it. We spent a whole year without a fence between us and the trail. For months, we collected police reports of theft, trespassing, and attempted camping in the yard. Because of this, King County Superior Court finally ordered Seattle City Light to allow us a temporary fence. But recently, our case was overturned in the Court of Appeals, and Seattle City Light plans to remove the fence again. We invited the city Shoreline Parks manager over to assess the situation. He told us the best way to avoid the spread of crime into what will be a neglected lot is to ask City Light to leave the fence where it is. We have offered to meet all of Seattle City Light's other demands, but they refused to leave the fence. Every other property that borders the park has a security fence. We will probably not be allowed to erect one, a new one closer to our house, as most of what is left of our yard is classified as protected wetlands. Shoreline has spent many hours cutting back the brush in the park and along the trail that used to be shelter for toileting, drug deals, camping, garbage. I know that while we ultimately wish for homes, counseling, and drug treatment for all those who need it, progress will be slow. It is so much easier to prevent crime than to try to clean it up. Seattle City Light to leave a security fence where it now stands. This will keep the neighborhood, the trail, and the park safer for everyone. Please stand up for us.
Thank you, Ms. Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so our next speaker is Isis Charast. I see that Isis is logged in with us on the phone and using the Zoom app. I've gone ahead and allowed the telephone connection to speak. Isis, if you want to hit *6, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Ms. Karst, I believe you have to hit *6 on the phone. I don't think Ms. Similchek-Smith can do it for you.
That's correct. I cannot do it for
Yeah.
her.
So
let me try to use the Zoom connection.
She has just appeared
There we
with
go.
her hand up on a separate connection, not the phone.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I don't believe the Zoom connection has an audio connected because I don't see the option to allow to talk.
Right. And I tried that and it says, Ms. Karst, you're using an older version of Zoom. So on the phone, if you can hit *6, right, Ms. Similchek-Smith?
Yes.
Yeah, if you can hit *6 on your phone, I think that's going to be the best way. All right, Ms. Similchek-Smith, can we pass Ms. Karst and can you work with her offline to get her on?
Yes.
English going to the next caller.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Isis Karst, and I live in Shoreline. I would like to welcome the new members of our Shoreline City Council. I'm sure making decisions about a growing city is not easy. As a member of Save Shoreline Trees, I have been more active in the decisions that have been made about comments regularly about the benefit of trees. So tonight I'd like to comment on Shoreline's commitment to the part of the city's Race to Zero campaign that I read about in the Shoreline Currents. And there was only a 5% decrease in emissions since 2009. And it's rather obvious to me that the reality that there hasn't really been a commitment to actualize the needed changes that need to be made. As part of Shoreline Trees, Save Shoreline Trees, I've found it disappointing that recognizing the importance of all the new information that there is about the benefit of trees seems to be overlooked in favor of building projects, and making decisions about trees calls tree codes seems to be passed forward constantly over and over. So perhaps hoping that these, gosh, I can't even read my own writing, sincerely interested will get, perhaps thinking that those of us that are sincerely interested will get bored and fall away. In the article in Shoreline Currents, it appears that no decisions are to be made for months in regards to the shoreline climate issues. So just as they haven't been in deciding on tree codes. So there can be community conversation, is what they say, or maybe there are building contracts that the council members hope to fulfill, and pushing the need to make actual decisions about tree codes.
If you want to finish your sentence, please go ahead.
I just want to say that I hope the new council members will see with bigger eyes that include a bigger picture for the growth of Shoreline and including the trees as an important part of our climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Karras.
Okay, so our last speaker is Jackie Curley.
Yes, hi, good evening. I'm Jackie Curley, a longtime Shoreline resident, speaking again regarding the enhanced shelter. Just wanted to encourage, again, maximum transparency for the community. And again, I hope for every success possible for the shelter as far as getting residents a safe and healthy place to stay. And I would like to encourage, if possible, maybe in the next Currents newsletter or another avenue, a status update from the City Council on progress of the shelter as far as operations and other relevant statistics for the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Curley. And I believe that concludes our public comment for the evening. So the next item is the consent calendar. Deputy Mayor Robertson.
I move approval of the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Councilmember Povey. Ms. Similcheck-Smith, will you run the vote?
Councilmember Ramsdell,
Aye.
Mayor Scully,
Aye.
Councilmember Mork,
Aye.
Councilmember McConnell,
Aye.
Councilmember Povey,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Robertson,
Aye.
and Councilmember Roberts.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Next and final item is study item 8A, which is discussion of the annual traffic report. It's my understanding that Ms. Didinsky and Captain Abbott will be doing the presentation.
Alrighty, good evening, Council. Captain Abbott and I are happy to be here tonight to walk you through the annual traffic report, which is our city's annual review and analysis of collisions on city streets, traffic enforcement statistics, and some other key traffic data collected throughout the year. So this annual traffic report, the collision data covers the 10-year period of 2011 through 2020 with a focus on 2016 through 2018 data in terms of identifying mitigation strategies and guiding traffic services safety program work throughout the year. The diagram on the slide shows how the report fits into other citywide processes, including the Transportation Improvement Plan, which is the city's list of transportation project needs over the next 6 years, which is unconstrained by funding availability. The TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan, is then narrowed down to inform the Capital Improvement Plan, the CIP, which is the financially constrained project list. And it's also worth noting that the TIP is also typically a starting point for informing grant pursuits throughout the years. So jumping into the data, in 2020, there were significantly less total collisions in comparison to the 9 years prior. This is likely due to the significant drop in travel caused by the pandemic. At the same time, while we expected to see fatal and serious injury collisions drop, instead the opposite happened, with traffic fatalities across the country increasing significantly. In Shoreline 2, we saw our highest number of fatalities for any 1 year in the 2011 to 2020 period, which is obviously a concerning trend. And while no one causal factor is clear, most practitioners agree that various risky driving behaviors played a big factor in 2020, including increased speeds and likely increased impaired driving or walking. So looking more broadly at injury collisions as a whole, which includes minor, serious, and fatal injury collisions here, we can see that the overall trend is on the rise. Likewise, with 2 years in a row of high numbers of serious and fatal collisions, the trend for these more severe collisions are also on the rise, which is very concerning. Zooming out to compare Shoreline's trends to regional ones, we see that our rate of overall collisions per 1,000 population is still lower than the King County rate as a whole. However, our trend line is relatively flat, whereas the King County trend line is going down a bit. And in 2020, Shoreline remains third highest in terms of serious and fatal injury collisions per 1,000 population compared to 6 other similarly sized cities in King County, and that's based on population. So in 2020, bicyclist and pedestrian collisions accounted for 32% of injury collisions, which is slightly lower than the prior 3-year average, which was 34%. Bicyclist-related collisions struck a new downward trend, which is encouraging, but obviously the pedestrian trend line is headed in the wrong direction still. With regard to contributing factors, Target Zero is the state's strategic safety plan to achieve 0 fatal and serious injury traffic deaths. The categories shown here represent the primary contributing factors identified by the state plan, given their frequent representation in serious injury and fatal collision occurrence. In Shoreline, our top 2 factors related to serious injury and fatal collisions continue to be intersection-related collisions and collisions involving pedestrians, with significant overlap between the 2. This tells us that focusing on pedestrian crossing improvements can be a helpful systemic mitigation strategy, and we have multiple capital projects underway that will do just this by doing things like bulbing out curbs for shorter crossing distances or installing pedestrian activated flashing beacons as an example. Honing in on street class, it follows logic that most injury collisions occur on our higher volume, higher speed streets, which are arterials. While arterials comprise just 27% of our total centerline miles, they are where the vast majority of injury collisions occur, which you can see in the chart on the bottom right there. Data indicates that improvements on these streets are definitely worth following. This is not to say that we ignore local streets. Public Works still reviews every concern shared about local streets too, and we use data to inform improvements. Most of the time though, this means that using driver education tools like radar speed feedback signs or yard signs is the best solution based on the data. So jumping into location-specific analysis now. This chart here depicts the overall portion of injury collisions that occur on state routes in the city. Our 2 state routes include Aurora Avenue North from 145th to 205th and Ballinger Way from 15th to 25th Avenue Northeast. The proportion dropped in 2020 compared to the 4 years prior. However, with more than 30% representing our injury collisions in Shoreline, obviously still a significant proportion. Staff is currently completing signal phasing improvements at multiple pedestrian collision hotspots on Aurora using a tool called leading pedestrian interval phasing. That's a mouthful. Shortened version of that is LPI. This phasing gives pedestrians a head start into the intersection before the concurrent vehicle phase gets their green. It is shown to greatly reduce pedestrian collisions. Given the scale of a project needed to address locations along Ballinger, a general project description has been included in past transportation improvement plans and will be included in upcoming tip sessions as well. Additionally, reviewing speed limits for both corridors in the future may be beneficial. Outside of state routes, this table represents intersection locations with an average of 3 collisions per year or more. Notably, the high collision locations correspond to top injury locations too. Locations shown with an X in this table have been recently improved, or at least relatively recently improved, will soon be improved, or are part of an active CIP project, capital improvement project. For example, 175th and Meridian is an active capital project in design right now. Dayton and 160th is new this year, and staff will review it for protected left turn phasing warrants. Meridian and 185th is a future transportation impact fee growth project for which TIF funds are being collected, and will also be looked at for bike safety striping improvements, as it's the only bike collision location hotspot this year. Last, 10th and 175th Northeast remained on the high list this year and was the location, sadly, of a fatality. An upcoming grant opportunity may be one tool for addressing this location, which I'll talk about next. So typically any new recommended projects would be discussed with council as part of the TIP process first. However, an upcoming grant opportunity closes before we will have the chance to do this year. As we just discussed, 10th Avenue Northeast and Northeast 175th Street experienced a fatal collision, and it's one of the top collision locations. In addition, there have been 2 serious injury and various other collisions between 5th and 15th Avenue Northeast. Staff believes a project to restripe the roadway to 3 lanes could be very competitive for the upcoming grant opportunity. The 3-lane treatment is a well-accepted strategy for mitigating collisions as it reduces conflict points for all turns to and from a corridor, while also improving safety for pedestrians by providing more room between vehicles and pedestrians on the sidewalk and decreasing the number of lanes that pedestrians must cross. These types of projects can be contentious, so council may wish to wait until the next grant cycle so this concept or others can be discussed as part of the TIP. So seeking feedback tonight on that. So looking now at non-state route, non-intersection collision locations, so that is segment collisions. We took a slightly different approach this year in order to make a more apples to apples comparison, grouping segment-related collisions, which is basically any collision that occurs between public intersections on a roadway segment into approximately half-mile lengths. This helps to normalize the data since some segments are very short while others are quite long, which can skew the data. The corridors shown in the table below represented the areas with the highest segment-related collisions. The upcoming sidewalk project on 19th will be an opportunity to partner potentially with the traffic safety program to consider any treatments that might supplement that project. On 15th, speed limits will be reduced this summer as part of the recently passed ordinance. On 15th, again, between 196 and Ballinger specifically, we saw a large amount of parked car-related collisions and think that edgeline treatments to better delineate that area could help with those types of collisions. So that's something we'll look to do in 2022. On the south end, Sound Transit 3 on 15th, this is still, will soon be improving the intersection at 145th, which may help somewhat with collisions related to the intersection in that area. So here we're looking at the top locations where vehicle versus pedestrian and vehicle versus bike collisions occurred. So not ped versus bike, but vehicle versus those modes. At 3 locations, we will be implementing leading pedestrian interval phasing quite soon. By the end of January is the anticipated completion date. As we discussed previously when talking about Aurora. The intersection of 20th Avenue Northwest and Northwest 195th Street should soon see some lighting improvements. We've submitted some work orders to SCL for that quite a few months ago now. And the upcoming sidewalk project on 20th may be another opportunity to improve that area, particularly the South Lake crossing. At 185th, as we discussed again at Meridian, we will look to make some potential marking and possibly signage improvements for cyclists in 2022. So other systemic and ongoing efforts our traffic services group is always working toward or shown here. So over the last several years, multiple updates have been made to Shoreline's engineering standards that work toward the goal of designing streets for injury reduction. This includes narrower lane widths, smaller curb radii, and requirements for developer installed pedestrian lights, just to name a few. Multiple projects are currently in design or construction that will employ these new standards. Also, as many of you are aware, an ordinance to reduce speed limits on 6 arterials was recently passed, will be implemented this summer. Lighting improvements also work towards systemic safety with 10 lights budgeted per year, street lights, and multiple pedestrian lights being installed as part of developer projects, as mentioned before. Our driver education program will continue, though notably we are down 2 staff. Our group of 3 is down to just me at the moment. So this program is currently on hold, but will resume pretty soon after we fill that vacancy. But this generally supports, the driver education program generally supports data collection, radar feedback, cart use, yard signs and crossing flags, as well as various other small spot improvements like signage or striping. And lastly, and not least by any means, pursuing grants. In terms of safety efforts completed, as noted, the speed limit ordinance was recently passed. Multiple intersections, like we just talked about, we'll soon see the leading pedestrian interval signal phasing, which I'm very excited about. Spot signage and marking improvements were made, including some warning signs on Aurora at some key kind of trouble access point locations, as well as the racing prohibition signs that were installed. We also implemented a number of new crosswalk marking locations this past season. And then, of course, various capital and developer street improvements have been completed. A couple highlights to note were Westminster and 155th, as well as the new 195th multi-use trail connection to the I-5 overpass. And with that, I will hand it over to Captain Abbott to talk about traffic enforcement.
Perfect. Good evening, Council. So enforcement statistics, you can see that contacts were down significantly in 2020, and that was due to the pandemic. Proportion of warning to citation was 52% higher than the average of 37%. And on the graph on the right, you can see it shows the citations was about 1,336, and then the criminal traffic citations was down to 71 for the year. Abandoned vehicles and parking. In 2020, abandoned vehicle tags and impounds were the highest in a five-year period. Parking citations were down from 2020. You can see in 2020, we had 649 abandoned vehicles and 55 of those were impounded. And the citations was 555. Collision reduction strategies. Ongoing enforcement efforts. We're continuing a combination of balanced enforcement and education. We're working with traffic services on speed limit reduction, implementation as needed. And then obviously we're addressing the community traffic concerns as they arise. Speed differential map emphasis patrols. We respond to community and stakeholder concerns whenever they come up or whenever they're needed. And we worked to, along with the council, to pass the racing ordinance in 2021, which will allow continued focusing on deterring the organized street racing events that we were seeing so many of prior to the passing of the ordinance.
All right,
Kendra.
Thanks for that. And back to me for just a few more slides before we wrap up for questions. So just a quick overview of speeding. This slide shows data where measured driver speeds, and specifically the 85th percentile speed, which is the speed at which 85% of drivers are traveling at or below, and compares that to the posted speed. And so this shows the difference between the two. Notably, the high priority streets, where the difference in posted versus 85th percentile speed is 8 miles per hour or more, did not change in comparison to the last cycle. This is partly due to the fact that we collected a little bit less data in 2020, but also just due to insignificant change in the data that we did collect. So some of them budged by, maybe a mile per hour, but not enough to knock it into a different category altogether. We'll continue to collect some additional data into 2022 and work with police on enforcement areas, including our new speed limit reductions. I'm sure this is of no big surprise to council at this point, but we saw a dramatic drop in traffic volume citywide, especially early into the pandemic, where the low point average was about 45% lower than 2019 pre-pandemic traffic volumes. We saw volumes steadily climb again, and now they're roughly within about 5% of baseline, with some over and some under. There have been also some shifts in kind of travel patterns with more peak hour spread, which means that particularly in the morning, we're seeing a little bit later, people leaving their house a little bit later. But again, those overarching volumes throughout the day are coming back to normal levels. And then last, also unsurprisingly, transit ridership plummeted in 2020 with springtime average daily boardings in Shoreline down by 61%. Relatively recent report outs by Metro indicate that ridership is picking back up again a little bit, but it still does not seem to be anywhere near 2019 kind of pre-pandemic levels just yet. With that, I think Captain Abbott and I will take any questions you might have.
Great, thank you both very much. Are there questions or comments from council? Deputy Mayor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor Scully. I'll get this party kicked off. Thank you so much for the report. It was a fun read to kick off the year, and it was fascinating to look back at 2020 and realize what an anomalous year that was. And frankly, looking at a lot of the statistics, I realized they're kind of general trend lines, but I didn't see anything that was so overly compelling that it would drive a policy change. And I look forward to hearing if there are contrary opinions among the other council members. With that, one of the things I did see that I'll comment on was support for the decision we made at the end of the year to go ahead and lower speed limits on the north end of 15th Avenue. So I just wanted to say thank you to the rest of the council for going along with that decision that we made. I think it was the right one for the safety of the community. And then finally, thank you for putting up the big screen about the 175th Street grant opportunity. What I remember of that is that discussion and that idea popped up right shortly before I joined the council. So I was not a part of the conversations that happened before, but certainly being a member of this neighborhood, heard a lot of chatter about it beyond, an isolated business here or there. It was kind of the talk of the town for a little bit. So my question back about timing and whether or not it's the right time to move forward would be, what is the outreach plan to the Ridgecrest and North City neighborhoods?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, I think, you're exactly right. This was kind of discussed as part of the 175th overlay project back in that time period. I think it must be 3 years ago now, maybe somewhere in that ballpark. And we did perform a study and did conduct some outreach at that point. It was contentious, to say the least. And it was on the heels of the restripe of Richmond Beach Road. So there's a lot going on. We decided at that time not to move forward with the 3-lane restripe. If we were to pursue grant funding this time around, there certainly would be outreach involved in that process. A similar effort that comes to mind through that specific grant is the Meridian Ave Safety Project, which is currently actively in design between 175th and 155th. And so we have budgeted quite a bit of outreach time and funding as part of that grant opportunity, at which point, we'll be going out to the public to talk through some potential strategies and ideas. And I think notably, there's going to be some opportunity for some varied cross sections. It's not just kind of plowing through one idea through the corridor without any opportunity for revision or kind of rethinking. The project or the grant itself, it typically provides enough flexibility in timing and budget to get some input and kind of make some strategic changes along the way as needed. So there would certainly be a robust outreach process as part of any grant opportunity. But as I noted in the slide, it is kind of predating our inclusion in a potential tip process, and so that is out of line with kind of our normal procedure. So certainly understandable if council wishes to go through those motions first to discuss this at a higher level.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we know the community doesn't love it when we make quick decisions and without proper process and feedback. So anecdotally, I'm not saying that I'm against it at all. I will say actually that anecdotally, I don't ever remember experiencing like traffic, stacked up traffic on those roads. So I think there's a case. I think there is definitely a case to be made, obviously, as the data shows, and the fact that these intersections are so problematic, turn lanes would absolutely be helpful. So I'm certainly open to having that conversation. And if there's a sense that it needs to happen quickly, I just will also advocate for making sure that we are in, right away in touch with the neighborhood associations at the very least. Thanks.
Ms. Didinsky, just following up quickly on that, are you looking for council input on whether staff should seek the March 2022 grant here tonight?
That would be helpful, although I should note we're necessarily, stuck once we, make the decision to pursue a grant. We can always refuse it if we decide later that it's not the right move.
Okay, thank you. So if folks can get their head around that and are willing to comment, that would be appreciated by staff. Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you, Mayor. My recollection of that stretch between 175th or on 175th from the freeway to 15th is that several of the businesses there were concerned about trucks being able to navigate down what would be a potentially a 3-lane road in that segment. And that it would be quite difficult for those sort of larger trucks that serve some of those businesses to actually make it on those streets. And that's my memory of what the largely concerns were. So I think that's my caution, and I think that I don't think it was neighborhood associations that were raising concerns in the past. It was the North City Business Association that was actually raising those concerns.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that there were two primary businesses that were voicing concerns about the 3-lane. By my recollection, and we sat down for multiple hours with a couple of them, the main concern being congestion rather than the ability to navigate outright. I think the 3-lane in many ways could offer some improvements in terms of kind of not operating right up against adjacent traffic or oncoming traffic. The center turn lane tends to offer more space for maneuverability, but the congestion was a concern for those businesses for sure.
So I think that's, I think that they would appreciate some sort of discussion or outreach before we move forward, because it would be a change in what, especially when there was negotiation, I believe, that happened when changing just sort of the just west of 15th to have sort of the 1-lane, to change the turning lanes there. So this would be a relatively recent change after that change was made. So I think outreach is necessary on that segment. I do have a couple questions though, which of staff, not unrelated to that particular piece. One of the challenges that we face as a city and have faced as a city is that without sort of the full infrastructure of the streets built out, curb lanes, sidewalks, and the like, there's very little that can be done without building the full set of infrastructure to narrow a road or make a street safer. So we have various right-of-way widths across the city, sometimes even 120 feet in certain segments, around certain segments, without sidewalks, without anything else to sort of help narrow or channel or to slow traffic. And I'm thinking in Mr. Hawkins' comment earlier about the Westminster Triangle neighborhood, which has been seen as a cut through for a long time, that's a very wide right of way. No improvements are made. And so the challenge is how can we sort of slow traffic when there's not necessarily any thing that we can build upon? I mean, my sense would be the full set of improvements need to be made to make those segments safer. Is that correct? Or is there things that can be done sort of on the ground without really putting in curbs and sidewalks?
Yeah, I mean, that's
not necessarily for that segment, but I mean, in general.
Yeah, good multifaceted question, or pretty broad question. I think so. Specific to Evanston, I do want to note that there are actually 2 traffic calming features on that street, and it's quite narrow in the sense that there's a neck down or chicanes that are in place that really only allow for one-way travel. Between that and the traffic circle, it's actually one of the more improved local streets that we have in terms of traffic calming. So that is worth noting. But yeah, those chicanes are one great method of slowing folks down. It creates what we call a yield street. Another way to accomplish that is with on-street parking, but we have to have kind of community buy-in for that. And it obviously puts people's cars at risk parking on street, but does create friction which studies show does help slow folks down. But again, the lack of curbs and lack of defined driveways cause some other tensions there in terms of people blocking driveways and that sort of thing. So always some trade-offs involved. But yeah, in terms of lowering speeds in general, I think, on our arterials even, we lack sidewalks in many places. And so that is a huge challenge. There are plenty of opportunities for influencing lower speeds. I think, the lowering speed limits on our arterials in line with the study that we completed is one way of making, just kind of budging that a little bit. It's not to say that we're going to see this drastic shift of a 10 mile per hour reduction or something in that scale, but it should help a little. Enforcement efforts, driver education, radar speed feedback signs, which we've installed quite a few of over the last several years. And I'm mostly focusing here on arterials. But the other thing, again, going back to that Meridian project, safety project we have underway now, things like improved crossings with RRFBs, rapid rectangular flashing beacons that are pedestrian activated, and to cause a little bit more caution for drivers, right? When they see a highlighted crossing where they could come across pedestrian, it does cause drivers to slow down a bit. So the more that we start improving spot locations like that, I think we're going to see driver speeds lower on arterials as well. Adjacent land use, presence of people, all of those things contribute to lower speeds. So I think as the areas redevelop around the stations in particular too, we'll start to see a changed landscape.
Thank you. My other question sort of involves some of the improvements that I've seen over the past years, and you've discussed a couple of them. One of them being sort of changes to the curb radii so that drivers have to be more careful about how they drive and how they turn corners. Often we see this sort of as right turn changes, sort of extending the curb out. But I've also seen some ideas of where you would make the left turn a little bit sharper too, where you extend the a median strip into sort of through the sidewalk, so that drivers can't cut the left turn close. I've also seen in lots of things about sort of raised sidewalks being safer. Are there some of these things that either through the grants that are being sought or sort of just in the general scope of improvements that we might see some more of these types of safety improvements made to streets across the city?
Definitely. So an example of a raised crosswalk was recently installed along Westminster between 155th and Aurora, so that developer improved area. So those were our city's first, which is pretty exciting. And yes, we certainly hope to use more of those as we, kind of continue design on various capital projects as well as developer projects. With the curb radii that you mentioned, I think that's one of the most key elements to really slowing. One of the major themes, as you heard, is pedestrians are often hit while crossing the street, and that includes side streets. Slowing drivers down as they turn corners is critical to that. And I think the design changes or the engineering development manual changes that we've made over the last couple of years work to make sure that we don't build back streets that encourage fast turns anymore. And so the hope is that every new project that comes through our door, with some exceptions for, we have to still accommodate trucks in some areas specifically, but on a case by case, we're really looking to implement lower, smaller curb radii, which means slower speeds. And so hopefully every project that comes through will see an element of that reduced curb radii in comparison to existing conditions. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And I know to hand among the public attendees, unfortunately, the only opportunity we have for public comment is during our public comment period. But I would encourage you to send an email if you'd like to communicate with all of us, or to contact staff individually for particular comments. Councilmember Mork.
Thank you. I've certainly learned a lot about traffic that I didn't know before and really appreciate the presentation. So I'm going to ask questions that my colleagues, I'm sure, already know the answers for, but I had an opportunity to go look at the intersection of 10th and 175th over the weekend. And I happened to arrive shortly after an accident. So there was police activity there that had closed off one of the lanes going eastbound and one going westbound while trying to deal with the accident, which was informative as it kind of leads to your the reason that we're talking about it. But and I have been tied up in traffic on that road for extended periods of time in the past. So I know that there is a traffic component that also fits into it. And I was wondering, as we try to figure out different alternatives to solve the problem there, is it possible to put up signage that says no left turns between this time and that time at 10th and redirect onto 15th or 5th and just improve the side street that they would use? Is that an interim thing that could be done that might make it a little bit safer?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things that we could look to do as sort of low cost staged improvements, if you will. I would say that a time turn restriction for a couple of reasons would be challenging. One is they typically require a fair amount of enforcement support to ensure compliance and to ensure that there isn't a variation in driver expectation, which can be a challenge. And we have been quite short-staffed, as I understand it, and perhaps Captain Abbott can speak to this as well, but our enforcement resources for traffic enforcement specifically are fairly limited, and we have a lot to do. So that's, a consideration for how much time we'd be able to kind of spend, emphasizing that as a change. We would also have to look at that from the perspective of circulation. If people can't make that turn, how else do they get there? And how does that impact other streets, right? So if they're not turning there, probably they're turning elsewhere left and making trips through local streets, for example, which can tend to be quite unpopular for those folks that live on those local streets for which those trips are deferred. So, there's certainly trade-offs associated, but I think probably most importantly worth noting is that the collisions that we are seeing are not strictly at 10th. We're also seeing quite a few at 12th and at 8th. I think it would be practically impossible to limit left turns, for a certain period of time at all of those locations, including the various driveways in between. And the turn restriction would not necessarily resolve many of the even serious injury collisions that have occurred kind of east and west of that location. It would be a kind of a stopgap for a very small percentage of collisions at that intersection. It does not necessarily address driver speed. It does not necessarily address kind of sight distance and conflict points, that sort of thing. So I would say it might be a small step in the right direction, potentially. And I actually don't know off the top of my head what time of day those collisions were even occurring. I don't think they were really limited to peak hour. In fact, I think the serious and fatal collision were actually off hours. So it wouldn't really have been, something applicable to that 4 to 6 p.m. peak that you typically see. But it's something we can evaluate. We've also considered split phasing the intersection, which means the eastbound and westbound movements occur separately altogether. There is no yielding to oncoming traffic in that method or in that structure. It heavily increases delay, which would be quite unpopular, I'm sure. And also, again, doesn't resolve many of the problems that I just described, sort of east and west of there and the conflict points and pedestrians and that kind of thing.
Thank you. That's helpful. I definitely understand that you couldn't do that without improving the side street and probably making it easier to turn left on both 15th and 5th. But I hadn't considered that people are turning on all of those streets and the limits for that. So thank you. I was just looking for possibility to be able to do a deeper study. Thank you.
Councilmember Ramsdell. I think you're muted, Councilmember.
Okay, yeah, there we go. And I'm trying to put my hand down. So there we
I
go.
can do that. I'll take it.
Oh, okay, all right. I have kind of like a two-part question. One is more kind of revisiting Mr. Hawkins' comments earlier regarding Evanston, and then your response to that. And then the other one is more of a general question regarding kind of data gathering. So the first part regarding like Evanston, you're absolutely correct. There are two kind of mitigating, kind of traffic mitigating well, not barriers, but not our obstructions, but elements on that on Evanston, one being chicanes, the other one being the kind of Meridian circle on the corner of 148th and Evanston. I think what the issue on Evanston is between 148th and 156th. There's no mitigating kind of features for traffic. So what we've been noticing in the neighborhood is that people are like flying down until they hit that Meridian or on 148th, and then they slow down, and then they're hitting like basically reasonable speeds. So that's just one. It just so happens that those mitigating features are clustered in almost like a one block area. And then there's like five blocks that don't have those features. So the other comment I have or question I have is regarding kind of I think the report is from a quantitative perspective is excellent. What I'm kind of wondering about is the qualitative data. And so around the issues of citizen reporting. So I think it'd be really helpful to know, I mean, clearly Captain Abbott mentioned that the police respond to citizen reports and concerns. And so I'm kind of wondering if that data that is collected by the police is then communicated to the city traffic department to be able to kind of incorporate some of the feedback that citizens are giving to the city regarding areas in the city that might be of a concern that may need to be addressed. So I think if it's like one or two people reporting a problem in the city, I can see that being okay, well, maybe there's like one person, but if it's a series of a number of reports that seem to be kind of following a pattern, then it would seem like, okay, maybe that's something that we need to pay attention to. And I think it'd be really helpful from the council to be able to see some of that data and also find out like what the results or the outcome of that data was, whether how the city kind of followed through and some of those reports. So that's my question. So if you could address those concerns, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that question. I think it's an important one for a couple of reasons. So we receive, on a high year, about 400 traffic safety complaints in a year. Every single one of those we respond to, not always as timely as I'd like to, especially when I'm down a couple of staff, but we do review each one. And respond each time. And I have interacted with Mr. Hawkins as well. So with that context in mind of, between 300 and 400 complaints, I would say 90 to 95% of them center on local street complaints. You can understand why addressing from a traffic calming perspective, safety on each one would be untenable. It's not something that we have any scope of resource to address, at a physical traffic calming device level at any point in time, which is why we refer to the traffic data. And so, using Evanston as an example of this, this is me going based on my recollection, but as I recall, I did look specifically at the traffic collision data, and actually streets to the west of Evanston, I think it must be Dayton, had collision history, whereas Evanston did not. And so that would be, a factor that I look at when I'm looking at, if we were to consider some treatments, whatever they may be for this neighborhood, where would they be best placed? And while I super appreciate the idea of cut through, and I know it happens there, we do still need to rely upon actual data and the, equity between streets when we put in things like traffic calming devices. What does that do to the neighboring street? So those are all very dynamic and complex decision-making processes that require a lot of time. In pretty much every case of traffic calming device installation, it takes 2 to 3 years, if not more, from kind of start to finish to get consensus to make sure that we are not negatively impacting the adjacent neighborhood. And so, yeah, we do use data to inform that. In terms of, the kind of accumulating data that we hear from qualitative complaints from residents, we do keep tabs on that through our asset management program. And so I do have all of that mapped where it is available. Sometimes people write in through SeeClickFix and don't leave specific address information and the like. And so that becomes difficult to trace to a pinpoint. But yes, we do map that and we do collect that data. And it's something I would actually really like to report on in future annual traffic report reviews. We do share that data with the police. Oftentimes I'm informing them and oftentimes it's them informing me, and we work together on particularly tricky things, particularly related to schools tend to be one that we focus on a bit more. Or if there's, of course, multiple neighbors kind of with the same overarching concern, we tend to meet out on site in many cases with neighbors to review specifically what it is they're seeing and what they think might be a good strategy for that. And if it's something easy like signage or markings in some cases, we do take action often. It's just that, contracting out things like speed humps is a very large price tag with a very large resource, staff resource, as well as community resource and funding resource involved. And so that tends to be reserved for locations with more collision history associated with them. So hopefully that helps to answer a little bit, but certainly we do collect that data and we do pay attention to it, and we coordinate cross-departmentally on it. And Captain Abbott, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else there, sorry.
No, you're great. That was pretty much it. I just wanted to say that we work really well together, kind of sharing information and coming up with a solution together, whatever that solution may be.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Povey.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, just want to appreciate the data. Of course, looking at the comparisons and the statistics, great. I was just curious as to why an action was not taken towards all the rest of the categories until the fatality increased from 1 to 3. But that's not my question. I want to go back to the grant because this is money we're talking about. So if there's going to be any capital improvement project, it's money. And so what is this type of grant? Sorry, I may be asking dumb questions, and so you have to bear with me for the coming weeks until I get into it. What is this type of grant? Is it project restrictive, whereas you have to have a project justified and get a grant? Because through your presentation, you showed a lot of potential CIPs throughout the city. And so I'm just curious, is this project specific, or you can get a grant and apply it to other projects?
That is a fantastic question, actually, not done in any way. And the grant itself, so this grant is administered by WSDOT, Washington State Department of Transportation. It used to go, well, it's still under the Highway Safety Improvement Program wing, but for local agencies, they've kind of shifted it to and renamed it to City Safety Program, which requires a local road safety plan. So lots of terms there, but that is to say that their new kind of format or structure for the Highway Safety Improvement Program grant, which is a longstanding program, focuses on data very strictly, and it uses a format that is almost identical to our annual traffic report. And so they look at, on a location basis, they will look at places where serious and fatal collisions have occurred, which there are a number of on 175th between 5th and 15th, which is why I think it would be quite competitive for grant funding because of the occurrence of 2 serious injury and 1 fatality collision. In terms of solutions then, what you get to pick from is sort of a list of proven safety countermeasures. And the grant is limited in terms of the amount of funding that they tend to give. And so it's unlikely, as an example, that we would be able to build a roundabout there under this grant. Roundabouts cost quite a bit of money, and the grant probably shooting for under $1 million. But a 3-lane road project to restripe would be quite cozy in that pocket of funding that is typically allocated for this grant. So it would be right on scope and scale of what that grant typically funds. And it would have the factors with the collision history as well as the proven safety countermeasure of that project type that kind of check all the boxes, which is why staff kind of decided to bring this to you for consideration. That said, there's always next cycle. In 2 years, those collisions will still be, within that range. And so we can further consider other options at that point. In terms of the other kind of wings of the grant, so I talked about location specific, there's also a wing that is systemic. And so that looks at stuff like improved crossings. So the grant that I talked about multiple times now, Meridian, for the crossing improvements, particularly, there was a couple of collisions that occurred regarding pedestrian crossings at sort of unimproved locations. And so we looked systemically and we see that we have crossing collisions with serious or fatal collision history. And so the state allocated a certain pot of money for implementing those pedestrian activated flashing beacons. And we just took the highest number of collisions on, in that list of potential locations, and we'll be installing them there. There's a number of them outside of Meridian as well. But that's sort of the systemic wing and the location strict wing of that grant. And yeah, we're trying to generally keep it refined to under $1 million, and within the sort of scope of proven safety countermeasures. No, that's a long-winded answer, but hopefully that helps with some clarity.
Thank you, Councilmember McConnell.
Kendra, you might have answered part of my question. The grant that you're wanting input from the council, it is not just the areas that we've been talking about a lot. It could be other areas. So I think you know how I feel about grants. Go for it. And as you said, if you decide after we get something that we're going to go a different way because of council or something, that's great. But I think grant money is just so awesome to go after, and thank you for mentioning that it is specific. So it's not just a pot of money for the city of Shoreline. It's fairly specific, but I'm sure that we have enough data to highlight the areas that would be competitive. Correct. So thank you for asking the council for that, and I want to support that. Thank you for the rest of the council for actually answering a lot of or putting out some things to you that answered a lot of my concerns. My biggest concern is the to going to 3 lanes or in that area really does require, as we all know, driven by citizen input, et cetera, because and the data, if it makes me feel good about doing something like that, that's great. But we're still probably going to get, backlash from the community. But it also does help, I think, for us to reach out for input, because that stretch is different than the rechannelization in Richmond Beach. It really does draw from a lot of businesses going through there, and also not Montlake Terrace, but actually maybe a little bit Montlake Terrace, but definitely Lake Forest Park, using those corridors to get in and out of their own residential areas. So my concern would be that the 3-lane concept would really need to be advertised heavily enough so that we hear from everybody that would be concerned, and to point out to all of us what those concerns are, because that's how I make a decision when I hear enough information. And sometimes it will change my mind, but other times it will just what do you call it? It would just solidify that the data is the most important thing. And other than that, I went around about way of having all my questions. And I want to be mindful of our time here and trying to get everybody to be able to get home at a reasonable amount of time. So thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. I just a couple of things to add, and then I'll open it back up to second round of questions. Two areas. First, the deputy mayor's comment of no one-to-one correlation. I agree. The only thing that jumped out at me as a direct change was the level of enforcement. And I'm not in any way critical of that. I mean, I know why that stops and citations went down. Early part of COVID, we didn't know how it was transmitted. And the last thing we wanted was police officers in close contact with people, potentially getting themselves sick and potentially becoming disease vectors, right? That was the last thing we wanted. So of course we stopped doing traffic stops or slowed down. We know more now, and Omicron is scrambling it, but I'm hopeful that within, the keepings of science that we're finding ways to get back to normal level of enforcement. And the second reason is staffing. And I know how deep that, I don't know, but I know a bit about how deep that problem is. And if we're putting an officer on a serious violent crime versus an officer on traffic, of course, they're being staffed on serious violent. And I don't have a solution for that, except to encourage you, Captain, and whoever ends up being our next round of police leadership, to think creatively to get those positions filled. And I think you'll find that council is willing to work with you on that. And that's a whole set of political and financial and everything else issues. But I am concerned that we're down what we are, and I think we're starting to see direct results of that in parking and traffic, like we talked about tonight, but also in a lot of other areas, including citizen satisfaction, which I expect will be down because folks are feeling like the officers aren't there the way they were. 175th, I agree with what I heard other council members saying. When this first came up years ago, I mostly looked at it as a complete streets issue. And for me, the question was, do we need to have safe bicycle passage on 175th? And where I came down on it was, well, let's use other streets for that in this particular case, because we heard very loudly from folks in the North City business community that they were concerned about impacts on truck and bus traffic. That made sense. But what's changed now is we had that fatality, and it had nothing to do with bicycles. I mean, it had everything to do with speed and just the roads dynamic not being ideal. So for me, this is the time to open up that conversation again. And I completely agree with council members McConnell and Bowie that if there is an opportunity to get a grant, we should do that. And we have such, the TIP-CIP difference is so vast. We have so many unfunded traffic projects that we really want to see that I would hate to see us pass up on 2022. Right? I mean, even if we can go for 2024, I'd hate to see us pass on 2022, with the caveat that I'm hoping we message it as we're reopening the conversation, right? We're not committing to 3 lanes because, that's also not ideal to say, hey, we heard you and we're going to do what you requested. Then all of a sudden we've changed course and people feel like they didn't have an opportunity to say, wait a minute. So I would encourage us to apply for the grant, to open up the conversations with the stakeholders, and also to have that in front of council as soon as we can get it. And thank you both for an excellent report, of course. Are there any other questions or comments from council? All right, seeing none, I think that concludes this item. And I also believe that is the last item on our agenda. So we are recessed for the evening. Thank you all for a great first meeting.
Thank you.